This is lecture 6 for EDD 939 module 5, and we're going to be talking about systems thinking a little bit more. And if you haven't already, I would encourage you to stop this video and watch the other two videos that I have before this one. It's in the same page, but they're about systems thinking. I think that'll be helpful to you to kind of put a frame of reference around it. So if you haven't watched those yet, I'd pause this one, then go watch those, and then come back. But assuming that you have watched those, you have a little understanding of what systems thinking is. If you've been through 918, you've been introduced to systems thinking in there as well. And so it's a concept that's been around for quite a while now. Peter Senge is one of the men who has been instrumental in really bringing systems thinking into the organizational and academic world. And so it's been around, and I think the book does a good job of covering systems thinking. And so I'm just going to highlight a few key ideas, and I think those two videos gave you a real good feel as well as what systems thinking is and how it plays in. But one of the big things that I wanted to talk about in regard to systems thinking that the book kind of hits on, and then those videos briefly mention it, but I don't feel like they really talk about it maybe enough, is the idea of mental models. Because mental models can really get in our way when it comes to moving forward, thinking of new ideas, new opportunities, how to change a system, restructure things. And so we really need to think about what are our mental models. And this connects back to the reframing concept of surfacing our implicit assumptions, beliefs, and things like that. But mental models are almost more than that. They're more intent. They're really how we have structured our view of the world. And we almost come to the point where this is the way it is, and this is the way it has to be. And a lot of times we have to be right about our mental models. And I mentioned Ray Jorgensen, a guy I worked with in the last video, the last lecture. And in fact, one of the videos about systems thinking, one of the guys, and I had just stumbled onto that video, and he references Ray Jorgensen as well. But anyway, one of the things that is so important that Jorgensen says is this. I love this statement. He says frequently, the greatest learning disability is the need to be right. The greatest learning disability is the need to be right, meaning I'm not open to what you have to say if I'm too busy trying to prove that I'm right. And that's where our mental models come into play, because I've structured the world and here's how it is. And so, and I'm going to dig in and try and prove that I'm right. And I carry that mental model. And so it's important that I identify the mental models that I have and I talk about them and I think through them and help others as well. It's part of being a strategic leader, because then we can start dealing with those mental models. And I was thinking of this, and I thought a good example that I came across was a movie that came out several years ago now, but it's called Glory Road, and Disney put it out as part of kind of their overall. They have quite a few in the sports series. They have, Remember the Titans with Denzel Washington. They have one, McFarland USA, with Kevin Costner in there about a cross-country team. And they have some about baseball. And this one, Glory Road, is about a basketball team. And it's set, it's true story, set back in the 1960s. And a guy by the name of Don Haskins, he moves his family to Texas Western College in El Paso, Texas. And, it's a little bit of a fish out of water story for him because, he is definitely not from that part of Texas. He's not from Texas at all. And so it's just kind of a bit of a culture shock for him in that respect. But he goes to coach for Texas Western. And again, this particular one was his first year there, so 1965-66 season. And so if you're thinking about this, what you realize is this is at the height of racial tensions and height of discrimination, particularly towards African Americans. And so Don Haskins goes to Texas Western, and it's a smaller school, not a lot of scholarship money. And what he finds out is that, the really top-notch white players don't want to go to Texas Western. And so he comes up with the idea to start recruiting the top-notch African-American players. And so he goes around and he builds this team. And his team is primarily African-American, some white players as well. And they they have a very great winning season. And Texas Western has never been very good in the past. And so, they have a great team. And of course, there's lots of struggles. I'm shortening it up. Long story short, they make it, and again, it's based on a true story. They make it to the 1966 NCAA championship game where they face Kentucky. And Kentucky is a proverbial powerhouse. And I think, if I remember correctly, all white players. And Haskins makes the decision for the championship game to only play African American players on his team. And the reason for that is because he is fighting against mental models within, I'll at least say, college basketball at the time. Because in the reason it hit me as I was thinking about mental models, that this really was a mental model that he was fighting against, is because he says it a few times, and other people, it comes up several times throughout the movie, and it was the belief that a lot of people held that African American players could not win championships. And they would even make the statements within the movie, well, they're good players, but they can't win championships. And so there was this mental model. So some of the teams who were willing to integrate at least a little bit. Now, there was a lot of, the whole thing is rooted in racism, don't misunderstand me. But there were some teams where they were willing to integrate a little bit. But then there was this underlying belief that African American players can't win championships. And so, if we're going to win championships, we need to have either all or predominantly white players. Haskins is fighting against, he's fighting racism as a whole, but he's really, for him, his kind of zone of influence, if you will, is, I need to change this mental model. And so going into the championship game, he makes the hard decision, and he talks to his players before the game, and he tells the white players, guys, I'm not going to play you at all. And they're, of course, supportive. But, and that's part of the drama of the movie. But he makes a decision to play all African-American players the whole time. Why? Because he is proving that they can win championship. And they do. They win the championship game. And that really started revolutionizing college basketball. But I think that's a great example of where, because again, we want to surface mental models to really get at problems. The overall problem that he's facing is racism. But in his particular context, he can't change all of these racist ideas over here. But what about this mental model that says African American players can't win championships? Hey, I can do something about that mental model, right? So I hope that gives you an idea of why it's important to surface and think about the mental models that we have. Because I can't address all of them. And I can't address, when we're tackling issues, again, a big issue like racism, I can't address every single component of it out there. But I can look at my own mental models and think long and hard, why do I react this way? Why do I respond this way? how am I approaching this, and get others to think about that too. So that's why it's important to think about mental models in regards to systems thinking. So I wanted to give a little bit of time to that, because again, the videos don't talk about that as much. It kind of a little bit, and then the book doesn't necessarily either. But a couple other things about systems thinking that are key that the book talks about is recognizing your own place in the system. So where do we fit in? And this is where the Industrial Revolution really damaged our ability to think from a system standpoint. Because as people moved from, the one who works on the whole piece of furniture, the craftsman, to then moves into the factory, you lose sight of your place in the system, because all I see is the task immediately in front of me. I put this widget on this gadget, and that's it. And then I send it on down the line. And so the Industrial Revolution kind of did away with systems thinking for a while, because you couldn't see your place in the system. And seeing your place in the system is seeing both the value and contribution you bring, but also where you can potentially get in the way and cause problems. So we need to make sure we see that. We're looking as a whole. I tend to argue that many of you, most of you who are healthcare educators or connected with healthcare as a whole, you've been trained in that field, do a little bit better with systems thinking, because you're kind of always thinking of systems from a biological standpoint. And so it's just taking that thinking and applying it to organizations and functions like that. And then we want to look for patterns over time. So as we're applying systems thinking, I want to look for these patterns over time. And I see ebbs and flows, because this, and then also looking at the big picture, and those two kind of go together. And I think of companies where they make mistakes in this area is you'll see them, work orders go up, right? So we have a lot of orders for something. Maybe we're a manufacturing company, and so now we need to hire a bunch of new workers because we've got all this work. Well, wait a minute. Let's take a step back. Let's look at patterns over time, and let's look at the big picture and figure out, is this a sustainable level of work? Meaning, is there a current spike in demand for something? So if we hire a bunch of new workers to meet this demand, then in 6 to 12 months, that demand drops off, and now we've got all of these extra workers on the payroll, and now we're going to have to lay people off, and that's not good for them, and it looks bad for us. Colleges do this sometimes. We'll get a blip in enrollment. Well, we need to build a new building, with more classrooms, or build more residence halls, or hire more faculty. Well, wait a minute. Is this a trend? Are we seeing enrollment go up this much steadily, or is this a blip? Right? You never build for the boom, and so you have to monitor those things. That's systems thinking. We're looking at patterns over time. We're looking at the big picture. A few years ago, I was in between jobs but wanted to keep some money coming in, so I went to work for Barnes & Noble, and really enjoyed the job. It was fun. I loved books, so it was a fun job. But the reason I went to work for them was they were ramping up for the holiday season. And so they hired a bunch of us part-time, and we could work close to full-time for the weeks if we wanted to, but we were still part-time, and we were temporary. They hired, and a lot of places do this, they hire for the holiday busy season. And they did it in an intelligent way. I think, they were hiring us like second week of November. So then we got through our training. So the first week that I was out of really doing training and could kind of navigate on my own was Thanksgiving week, right? And that's kind of the first big week for shopping. I know people are shopping beforehand, but that was kind of the first big week for shopping. And so I was ready, and others as well who came in with me were ready to hit the ground running when the busy shopping season started. And then they told us up front, we will keep you all on, if you want to stay on, through probably about the second week of January, because then we get through returns and everything else. And then just so you know, most of you, we will let you go. We're going to probably have a few positions. So, if you want to keep them, you're a good worker, Now, for me, I ended up getting another job settled right before Christmas. So I quit before that. But they ramped up temporarily because they knew they would have the busyness. And so, those are the kind of things where companies, you see them making bad decisions or poor decisions because either one, again, they hire full time for the boom, or they go, well, just grit your teeth and work overtime. Well, and sometimes that will work if it's very temporary, and sometimes people want overtime, so you can get through that. Because then the flip side of that is, I talked about hiring too many, but I've also seen, I've seen this in colleges, where faculty for years carry an overload. Now, the extra money is nice, but it'll also wear you down. And so it's like year after year, we have faculty who are carrying fairly significant overloads on their teaching. Okay, if that's happening that much, we probably need to look at hiring more faculty. This isn't a boom. It's not a blip. Let's look at the big picture. What are the patterns over time telling us? And so those are the kind of things that tie into systems thinking. And so again, I didn't want to spend a lot of time because we spent a whole module in 918 on systems thinking. But I wanted you to kind of get reacquainted with systems thinking and see how it connects with strategic leadership, with strategic thinking, because it is about thinking and looking at the system as a whole. And how do we work through this as we move forward then into the next module to talk about strategic acting. So I hope you enjoyed this module, and we will see you in Module 6.